Snow drifted like ash from a dead fire, settling over the broken fences and crooked hills of the high country. A brittle wind clawed through the skeletal remains of cottonwoods, whistling against the warped boards of an old barn that stood half forgotten at the edge of nowhere. Inside, the air was thick with the musk of horses and dry hay, shadows flickering as a lone candle fought the draft. The cowboy sat hunched near the horse, the animal's warm breath steaming in the cold as he ran a calloused hand down its trembling neck. His coat was heavy, wool-lined, but the cold still gnawed at his bones. His face was carved with years, not old, but worn. He'd said little to anyone for months, not since he'd buried the last of his reasons to speak. The hollow in his chest was something he fed with silence. The storm outside had not let up for days, and he hadn't planned to leave until it passed. He thought he knew solitude. He thought he preferred it. Then the barn door creaked open. It was not loud, not even clear at first, if he had heard it, but the horse's ears twitched. The cowboy rose slowly, quietly, pulling the long knife from his belt as shadows pooled beyond the doorway. And then she stepped inside, a child, small, barefoot, dress torn, cheeks raw from wind and streaked with something darker than dirt. Her eyes were too wide, too hollow for 7 years of life. She whispered, barely sound, yet the words crawled under his skin like ice. "They tied up my mother. They killed my father. Please help us." The knife in his hand lowered, but his heart didn't. He stood there, unmoving, until the knife fell from his fingers into the hay. She swayed on her feet. He crossed the space without thought, catching her before she collapsed. She weighed nothing, like holding a ghost. Her body shivered uncontrollably as he lowered her near the horse's warmth, wrapping his all-weight coat around her narrow shoulders. She didn't resist. She didn't cry. Her small fists just clutched at the coat like it might stop the world from swallowing her whole. He didn't ask questions, not yet. Questions were useless when answers wouldn't save you from freezing before dawn. Instead, he found what food he had: dried meat, a canteen of near-frozen water. He watched her drink, gulping like a starving animal, until she choked. His hand hovered near her back, unsure whether comfort was something he remembered how to give. Finally, when she could speak again, he asked. Her voice cracked when she answered. "They came. Last night. Mama said not to open the door, but they set the house on fire." A pause, a tremor. "Papa ran out first. They shot him." Her breath hitched. "I ran, Mama too, but they caught her." He waited, not because he was patient, but because he didn't know what to say. "She said no to their boss man, said she wouldn't marry him, that's why they killed Papa." He closed his eyes. She looked up at him then, small and broken and asking without words what he was supposed to do now. He stood, pacing back to his horse. He braced a hand against the wall, leaning into it as if it might hold up his shaking. He knew men like those. Worse, he knew what happened to women left tied too long. When he turned back, her eyes were closed, not asleep, just too tired to stay awake. She looked smaller now, swallowed by his coat, the candlelight soft on her dirt-smudged cheeks. His mind screamed to leave. He'd survived this long because he didn't get involved anymore. Ghosts didn't save people. But there she was, and he remembered another grave too small, another name he didn't speak. At dawn he made the decision. He woke her gently. She flinched in her sleep before realizing it was him. He spoke low. "I'm going." Her lip trembled. "Where?" "To get her back." He made sure she ate before he left. His horse was packed light but ready. He gave her half his water, what dried food he could spare, and wrapped her in more blankets within the barn's darkest corner. "You don't open that door. Not for anyone." She nodded. His hand hovered above her head but didn't touch. Then he stepped into the storm. Wind cut into him like razors, tearing at his coat and stinging his eyes. He forced the horse onward, one step at a time. He rode through snow and silence, through ridges where dead trees stood like gallows against the gray sky. His thoughts warred, fool's errand, but he had no choice, not anymore. It wasn't long before the cold turned hostile. A river, half frozen, blocked his path. The current ran swift beneath the ice, black as gunmetal. He dismounted, leading the horse forward, boots cracking through ice that broke beneath weight. At one point he went under, the water cut like a knife. He dragged himself up coughing, pulling the horse by the reins until they cleared the other side. He pressed on, soaked and shaking, muscles stiffening as the cold clung to his skin like second flesh. The blizzard closed around him. He lost sense of direction more than once. His compass was gut and guesswork now. Hours passed. Night fell. He huddled beneath a rock overhang, using the horse's body for warmth. He dared no fire. Memories hunted him in the dark. A face he'd buried, a name he wouldn't say. He clenched his fists until his nails cut his own palms. This wasn't about redemption. It was survival. By dawn, the storm cleared, and there, over the ridgeline, he saw the smoke, a thin column rising steady. The camp. He slid from the saddle and led his horse into cover. Belly to the frozen ground, he crept closer. Through dead grass and frost, he watched. A dozen men, maybe more. Campfires burning, horses penned, the smell of whiskey and cooked meat heavy on the wind, and her, tied near the wet. Gone alive, but barely. Her dress torn, her face bruised. She sat upright, stubborn, but her eyes were half closed, hands bound tight. He could see the marks from here, his jaw clenched. Then he saw the man, the leader, tall, broad, black coat slick with grease, face marked with a ragged scar that tore from cheek to chin. He paced like a wolf, slow, confident. His eyes never softened. They were dead long before the snow fell. The cowboy counted the guards. Too many. He'd seen worse odds. He waited for night. When darkness came, he moved. Like smoke, he slid into the camp. Closer. Every step a lifetime. He reached the wagon. Her breathing was ragged. Her eyes opened. Recognition. Relief. Then the snap of a twig. A guard's voice barked. He cursed himself. Too slow. Too loud. Gunfire tore the night. He grabbed the woman, cutting her free in one swipe. Bullets hissed past as he dragged her up. She screamed from pain but stayed upright. Shouts, lanterns, men closing. He pulled her toward the trees. A bullet grazed his shoulder. Hot pain. More gunfire, then nothing but the pounding of his heart. Branches tore at him, snow slowed his boots, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Somehow they made it into the deep trees. He collapsed beside a frozen creek, breath ragged, blood soaking his sleeve. She gasped beside him. I can't move. He swallowed his own pain, focused on her. You're safe now. But it wasn't true. He knew they'd follow, knew he'd die if he stayed. His strength failed him, and then, from the darkness, came movement. He reached for his revolver. Too late. A figure emerged, silent as breath, face painted in streaks of mud and ash, eyes unreadable. The cowboy's hand froze. The figure crouched beside him, examined the wound. Without a word, it pressed moss to the bleeding, tied it fast. The cowboy watched, too weak to fight, too confused to understand. The stranger fed the woman water, then simply stood, silent, a ghost, and walked away. He faded into sleep before sunrise, uncertain whether death or mercy had found him. But when he woke, his shoulder was bandaged, his wound clean. The woman lay beside him, breathing steady, and across the creek, sitting still as stone, the stranger waited. Not an enemy, not yet. For the first time in years, the cowboy felt something alien curl in his gut. Hope. But hope was dangerous. He pulled himself upright, locking eyes with the waiting figure. The war was not over. Not yet. Snow whipped sideways through the pines, carving thin lines of white across the landscape as dawn fought to break over the horizon. Beneath the frozen branches, he moved slow, careful, crouched low to the earth. His coat hung heavy, sodden from the storm. Blood stiff in the sleeve where his shoulder wound still throbbed, but pain didn't matter. Pain was a language he understood, and right now, silence was survival. His horse had been left behind, tied in the thickets. It wouldn't survive the climb ahead. He needed no distractions now. Ahead, past the splintered rocks and deadfall, smoke rose steady, black as ink against the pale morning sky. A camp. He counted 2 fires from here, could smell the wet wood burning, could almost hear the laughter drifting on the brittle wind. Men who thought themselves safe. He tasted the memory of gunpowder in his throat. She was still there. He shifted his weight forward, the cold earth biting into his knees. His breath came slow, shallow. Movement had to be minimal now. Every snap of ice beneath his boots could kill her, and kill him. But still, he crawled forward. The trees thinned where the ridge fell into the clearing. Below, the camp sprawled haphazard between boulders and felled logs. Horses were staked farther off, nervous from the scent of wolves in the hills. Men lounged near the fires. He counted 10, maybe 12, a few more in the shadows. Their leader paced methodically. The black coat marked him easily even from here. He moved like a man who owned everything in sight. His scar caught what little light the sky offered. Near the center of camp, tied beside the wagons, her silhouette remained. He watched her shoulders rise and fall. She was alive. For now. He shifted position, scanning for weaknesses. Guards rotated near the fires. 2 held rifles loosely, another cleaned a pistol. Overconfidence. They weren't expecting rescue. No one came this far out in the cold to die for strangers. He thought of the girl back in the barn, curled beneath his old coat, waiting for a mother who might not return. Failure wasn't an option. Not again. When darkness came, he'd move. That decision was made. The method was less clear. He retreated into the trees, low and silent, until the camp was nothing but a smear of light behind him. As the hours bled slow through the trees, the snow deepened. His wound burned, but his mind stayed sharp. Hunger clawed at him, but he ignored it. Fatigue whispered in his bones. He ignored that too. Survival narrowed everything to what mattered. Then, as the sun fell behind the hills, something changed. He wasn't alone. The awareness struck first, primal and unspoken. Something shifted in the air. A crackle, a tension in the trees. His hand drifted to his revolver, smooth from practice, but he hesitated, not out of fear, out of confusion. He couldn't hear footsteps, couldn't smell horses, but something watched, a flicker of movement, to his right. His finger twitched near the trigger. Then he saw him, a figure materialized between the trees, where no one should stand. Not a man from the camp, not like them, taller, lean, painted face blending with bark and shadow, eyes dark, unreadable. He moved like wind, quiet and certain until he stopped not 20 feet away. The cowboy raised his revolver but didn't fire. The stranger stood still. Minutes dragged like hours. The cowboy's heart pounded, but his hand stayed steady. He didn't speak. Neither did the stranger. Then, slowly, deliberately, the stranger extended an open hand. No threat. An offering. In the other hand, a strip of dried meat. A gesture more ancient than words. The cowboy's fingers trembled once before he lowered the revolver. He didn't move to take the food, but he didn't refuse it. They watched each other until the stranger laid the food on a flat stone, then stepped back, silent as snowfall. No explanation came. None was needed. When the cowboy ate, the stranger vanished. That night, for the first time in days, the cowboy slept without freezing. When dawn broke, the stranger was waiting. The cowboy didn't speak, not out of pride. He simply didn't know how to bridge the silence between them. But the stranger pointed toward the ridge, toward the camp, and nodded once. The message was clear. He knew, and he'd help, without asking why, without promise of reward. Maybe because the girl's mother wasn't the only one taken by men who called themselves owners, or maybe because in the cruelty of the snow, enemies weren't as common as those simply trying to endure. Without words, they moved, side by side, through the thinning pines. The stranger's knowledge of the terrain was absolute. He moved with purpose, guiding the cowboy through hidden paths, past silent markers carved into stone where no white man would think to look. The camp came into view again, from a new angle, closer, riskier, but necessary. The cowboy watched the stranger kneel near the earth, drawing simple lines in the snow with a fingertip. A plan. Simple, direct. One would draw the guards, the other would strike. Death came easy in these hills. Both understood. The cowboy checked his revolver. 6 rounds. No more. The stranger readied a bow strung with sinew and horn. A knife gleamed at his hip. No words exchanged, but something else passed. Between them. Not friendship. Trust. Forged in the knowledge that both had reasons to fight. Darkness crept across the snow as they waited. When the moment came, it happened fast. Too fast. A silent arrow hissed through the cold air, embedding in a guard's throat before the man even gasped. Then gunfire shattered the silence. The cowboy moved from cover, revolver bucking in his fist. 3 shots, 2 bodies. The camp erupted. Men scrambled, half drunk, too slow to find their rifles. But the leader was not slow. He barked orders, firing blindly toward the trees, driving his men to form a ring around the wagon, where she still lay tied. The cowboy advanced anyway. Bullets whipped past him, tearing bark from trees. The stranger flanked left, silent death slipping between shadows, knife flashing when needed. But numbers pressed. The cowboy felt the shift. This wasn't victory. It was survival. He saw the scarred leader draw a long-barreled revolver, aiming straight. No time. The cowboy ducked low, rolling behind a fallen log as gunfire chewed through the wood above him. His heart thundered. He could hear her screaming now, not words, just terror. That sound broke him. He surged forward. A shot grazed his thigh, burned through muscle, but he didn't stop. Another arrow sank deep into a bandit's spine. The cowboy reached her, fingers fumbled the rope, cutting through it with his knife. She fell into his arms, sobbing, too weak to stand. Then came the scarred man's voice, cold and clear. "Drop her." He turned. The leader stood 10 paces away, revolver level, dead eyes. The cowboy didn't drop her. He didn't speak. The stranger wasn't close enough. It would end here. The cowboy shifted his body to shield her, breathing ragged. "Drop her." The leader cocked the hammer. Then something changed. A flicker behind the leader's eyes. Confusion. He staggered, looked down. Blood pooled beneath his coat. The knife handle protruded from his side. The stranger stood behind him, silent as death. The scarred man fell to his knees, still staring, then collapsed forward into the snow. Silence. Real silence. No more gunfire. No more screams, just wind and breathing. The cowboy clutched the woman tighter, not trusting what he saw, but no more enemies came. The stranger wiped his knife clean in the snow, then vanished from view. The cowboy pulled the woman to her feet. She leaned on him, trembling. They moved away from the blood and bodies. The camp faded behind them. By the time the moon rose, they had reached the shelter of the lower trees. She collapsed against a boulder, breathing too fast. He knelt beside her, inspecting her wrists, torn raw, hands shaking. His own legs threatened to give. Then the stranger appeared again, offering water. She drank. The cowboy watched, unsure what this meant. But when the stranger nodded once, gesturing toward the valley beyond, the cowboy understood. The path home, or as close as they'd get. He looked at the woman, then at the path, then at the stranger. Nothing was said, nothing needed to be. When they moved together. The snow fell behind them, erasing footprints as if none of it had ever happened. But the blood would not wash from his hands so easily, nor from his mind, and somewhere deep down he knew this wasn't the end. Not yet. The mountains loomed silent, their jagged peaks black against the early dawn as the wind stirred what little warmth remained. Somewhere behind them, in the valley below, blood soaked the snow. The cowboy didn't look back. He stood motionless at the tree line, body stiff from exhaustion, shoulder tight with pain where the wound still wept beneath stiff cloth. Beside him, the woman leaned heavily against a stone, her wrists raw, her face pale, but her eyes steady. She'd stopped trembling. Survival had forced strength upon her. The stranger watched him both from a distance. His face betrayed nothing, no curiosity, no judgment, only patience. His bow rested at his side, his knife clean, his purpose unreadable. The cowboy shifted his weight. His breath hung like smoke in the frozen air. In front of them stretched nothing but wilderness. Miles of unbroken snow and stone, valleys choked with black trees, cliffs that shattered the horizon. Somewhere beyond it, the barn, the girl, safety. But between here and there lay hunger, cold, and the men who might still follow. The leader was dead, but death didn't stop fear from spreading. The others might scatter, or they might seek revenge. He'd learned not to gamble on hope. The stranger moved first. Without speaking, he stepped into the trees. A silent invitation. The cowboy hesitated only a moment before lifting the woman carefully to her feet. Her legs barely supported her, but the fear that kept her upright now turned into something else. A raw determination, like the stubbornness he'd seen once in another woman's eyes. That memory burned more than his wounds. They walked. Each step was a small war. His thigh burned with every movement. Her breathing rasped. Once, she stumbled, her knees giving way, but he caught her before she hit the ground. He didn't speak. He simply lifted her arm around his shoulder and forced her to keep moving. One step, then another. The stranger scouted ahead, his silhouette slipping like smoke through the pines. Every so often he would stop, waiting, eyes unreadable. Then he moved on. Time blurred, snow deepened. The cold became a second skin. When they could go no farther, they stopped beneath a granite ledge. The stranger lit no fire. The cowboy understood. Smoke could kill as surely as a bullet. Instead, the stranger passed thin strips of dried meat, water from a creek near frozen. They ate in silence. That night the cowboy did in sleep. He kept his revolver resting across his lap, his eyes half closed, ears tuned to the smallest sound. The woman slept fitfully. Her dreams were worse than her waking hours. The stranger watched from the edge of the trees, motionless. When dawn came, the cowboy forced himself to stand. His leg barely supported him now. The blood loss had weakened him more than he'd allowed himself to admit. His fingers trembled when he holstered the revolver. She saw. She said nothing. There wasn't time. The stranger moved toward them, finally breaking the silence. His voice was low, deliberate, a single word. North. The cowboy met his gaze, then nodded. They followed. Snow fell harder now, a thick, blinding curtain. Visibility shrank to feet. Trees loomed suddenly from the white. The cold bit harder, gnawing at fingers and ears. The woman's steps faltered. The cowboy tightened his grip around her waist, forcing her forward. He remembered another winter, another woman. A grave so small he dug it with his bare hands when the frozen ground refused the shovel. Not again. The stranger guided them through narrow passes where sheer cliffs swallowed sound, their world reduced to the crunch of snow beneath boots, the rasp of breathing, and the endless press of cold. By midday, the cowboy's strength cracked. His knees buckled. He sank down hard against the snow, breath rasping, eyes closed. The woman tried to lift him, failed. The stranger watched. Then silently he knelt beside the cowboy. His fingers moved fast, stripping layers of frozen cloth, checking the wound. Blood soaked the bandages. Infection threatened. Without hesitation, the stranger produced a sharp stone blade and pressed it into the cowboy's wound. The cowboy didn't scream. He bit down until blood filled his mouth. The stranger worked quickly, cauterizing the wound with a heated blade pulled from coals hidden in his pouch. Smoke hissed. Flesh burned. When it was done, the cowboy collapsed sideways. The stranger poured snow over the wound, packed it tight, slowed the bleeds. Then he stood. Without hesitation, he lifted the cowboy over his shoulder and walked. The woman followed. Hours bled away. The stranger did not tire. When the cowboy woke, it was to the sound of wind against stone. He was propped against a wall, weak but alive. The stranger crouched nearby, sharpening his blade. The woman sat close, her hand resting near his, not quite touching. "You'll move by morning," the stranger said. The cowboy said nothing, but inside, a single thought remained. He had to stand. For the girl, for the woman beside him, for himself. Morning came. He stood. The wound tore. Blood oozed. But he stood. The stranger nodded once. They walked again, through canyons where echoes lied, across frozen rivers where the ice cracked like gunshots, beneath cliffs where snow slid in silent avalanches, and one wrong sound could bury them. Twice they saw shapes behind them. Men. Shadows. The stranger signaled without words. Danger. They pressed harder. The cowboy's heart hammered constantly now, not from fear, but from the sheer force of willing himself forward. When the woman faltered, he lifted her. When his leg buckled, she pulled him upright. Survival wasn't a choice anymore. It was everything. The stranger killed a hare. The meat barely warmed their stomachs. Hunger gnawed. By the third day, frostbite blackened the cowboy's fingertips. His revolver froze in its holster. The stranger melted snow in his hands, poured it between cracked lips. They didn't stop. Not until, at last, from the ridgeline, they saw it. The barn. A dark silhouette against the endless white. The cowboy's legs nearly gave then, but not from weakness. From relief. For the first time in days, he let himself believe. He carried the woman the final stretch, too exhausted to feel the weight. When the barn doors creaked open, the girl stood inside. Barefoot, eyes wide, tears streaking down her face. Her mother fell to her knees. They collided in silence, arms wrapped tight, trembling, faces buried against each other. The woman's sobs cracked the still air. The cowboy stood over them, too hollow to cry. The stranger waited at the doorway. Their eyes met. The cowboy, with everything left in him, nodded once. The stranger returned the nod, then turned and walked into the snow. No words, no farewell. The cowboy watched until the figure vanished between the trees. Then, without a sound, he sank to his knees in the hay. His body shook, not from cold, from everything else. The girl's voice, small, fragile, broke through the silence. "Will you stay?" He couldn't answer. She asked again. Her hand touched his. He looked at her, saw her mother, saw his own failure, his silence, his loss. But now, there was something else. Life. He nodded. Once, the storm outside howled, but inside the barn it was warm. Warm enough. Night came. The cowboy sat near the girl and her mother as they slept huddled together. For the first time in years he slept without nightmares. At dawn the wind slowed. Snow settled. And from somewhere deep inside the cowboy knew he'd ride again, but not away from life. This time, toward it. If this story stirred something in you, if you felt the cold, the fear, and the hope, they did too. Stories like this remind us, even the loneliest soul can choose to stand, to fight, and to save. So if you believe in courage, in sacrifice, in second chances, like the video, share it, subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience, redemption, and the untold battles of the old frontier. And remember, sometimes, the quietest riders carry the heaviest stories.